Welcome back to Basic. We're doing the Eye of Basic, Imitating Jesus, and today we're talking about a tough one: speaking truth to power. The way of Jesus that he told those who were in powerful positions, those who could hurt him, hurt others, those who were in charge, the leaders. He told them truths they did not want to hear because he was advocating for justice, advocating for the vulnerable. And as followers of Jesus, we are called to do the same.
Hmm.
And I don't know about you, I do not like doing that.
I don't either. I
Yeah.
don't either. And I think this world asks you to be a public theologian very often, whether you're a pastor or just a Christian. They're like, well,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk. Why aren't you at the rallies? Why aren't you, going and screaming at the Capitol, right? Like, and so it does feel like you have to perform somehow
Yeah.
as a Christian.
And there's a pressure to do it, and there's also pressure not to do it. Like
Right.
I don't want my pastor out there saying this when I disagree.
Right.
And so we're always in discernment about how to do it, but I think it's pretty clear that Jesus calls us to be engaged
Oh, yeah.
in speaking God's truth, the Christian truth, Christian values
Mm.
to those who have political power.
Right.
And how did Jesus do this? Like when we look at his life, how did he speak truth to power or
Right.
take public action? And you want to share the story of the temple? You were talking about that earlier.
Right. I was just saying, I was like, Jesus, angry Jesus does come out. We talk a lot about imitating Jesus, kindness, gentleness, self
Right.
control, right? The fruits of the Spirit. And it's like Jesus also flipped tables in the temple. He walks into the temple, realizes that people are like, they're just like, here's all the things, come buy this. And they're ratcheting up the prices for the offerings that people are going to give at the temple. And he's just like, you've turned this into a den of robbers. And he flips their money table
Mm-hmm.
and is like, stop it. Like, this is a place for God and God's people to connect. And you have turned it into just like a sales.
And fashions a whip and
Oh, yeah.
drives the animals out and shuts down the temple. I mean, this is equivalent to people marching in the streets, doing sit-ins,
Right.
stopping regular activity, breaking the law
Right.
in order to advocate for what
Right.
what he thinks is right.
Right.
And in that case, it was what the temple is for. That it's
Mm-hmm.
not meant to take advantage of the poor. It's not meant to line the pockets of the money
Right.
changers, but it's meant to be a house of prayer. And so Jesus took dramatic action
Yeah.
that would make headlines today. It's
Yeah.
why it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
It made headlines then,
Yeah.
and it put a target on his back.
Right.
That the powerful then decided they would try to kill him. That
Right.
they would try to arrest him and kill him.
Right. But like, we're Lutherans, and so we follow Martin Luther, who did the exact same thing to the
Right.
Catholic Church at the time, right? He spoke truth to power. He said, I've been reading my scriptures, and you're abusing this with the use of indulgences.
Mm-hmm.
You want to line your pockets so that you can build St. Peter's, and this beautiful cathedral to your name and your honor, but you're doing it on the backs of peasants who are afraid for hell or purgatory. And so you're selling getting out of purgatory,
Selling salvation.
selling salvation. And so, right, Luther spoke truth to power. So we are inheritors of that as Lutherans.
Yeah.
It also made me think of the civil rights movement and how so many black preachers were a part of the civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor, and he got his doctorate, his like doctorate of ministry. And so like he was rooted in the scriptures and
Yeah.
used the scriptures a lot in his testimonies and in his speeches. And it was intriguing because he called out white preachers
Right.
and said, "Where are you? Why aren't you
That
out here?"
letter from a Birmingham jail is
Right.
calling out people
I
like
try to
me.
read it every Martin Luther King
Yeah.
Jr. weekend because I'm like, oh, remember.
Right. You say you believe these things about Jesus.
Right.
Where's your action to back it up?
Right.
And a lot of what Jesus called out was religious power, right? He
Mhm.
was talking about the Pharisees a lot of time. The Pharisees were a party of religious leaders who, would put demands on people about, and were kind of the police officers of the biblical laws,
Mhm.
saying you have to obey this, this, and this. And
Mhm.
Jesus called them hypocrites, whitewashed tombs, who, care more about, about purity laws than they do about people,
Mhm.
and was a constant critic
Yeah.
of the Pharisees, and would tell parables where the Pharisees would be like, wait a minute, that was about us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so Jesus, in the public eye, painted a target on his back by speaking that truth, because I think Jesus had, an audience, because of his gifts, because of his storytelling ability, because of the platform that he had, and he made sure to use that on behalf of the poor and the oppressed and the vulnerable. And so, as followers of Jesus, we're called to do the same.
Right.
Like, who are the vulnerable who need to be advocated for?
Right.
And I would say there's different ways of doing that.
Yes.
Sometimes it's holding up, writing a sign and marching in a rally. Sometimes it's how you vote. Sometimes it's what you preach about. Sometimes it's if you I'm someone who finds myself in rooms where there's people of power, in rooms with the mayor and council members of our city, and so using those opportunities to advocate too, I think, is a call on my life.
Right.
And so it's recognizing every one of us who follow Jesus are called to advocate
Right.
for the oppressed, for the marginalized, for the poor, for the outcast, for the people who don't have power,
Right.
and then using whatever positions we have to do that.
Right. And it is wonderful that we're in America and we have democracy, because it was just recently that here in the city we were discussing a ban on living in your cars, and like a kind of a harsher take on our homeless policies in the city. And so I went to the city council meeting, and to see that like everyone got to have a vote, and they went really long in this meeting to make sure that everybody could say what they wanted to say, and our city council had to hear it and listen. Now, yes, ultimately they're going to decide things, and people were happy and some people were not happy with their decision, but we also live in a place where your voice matters, and so you should use it. Yeah.
I think it's hard. We have, like in our congregation, we have some people who are really involved in advocacy and justice work, and they lose a lot, right? Like they say they'll discern together, this is the Christian value, we're going to advocate for it. They'll do community listening sessions, and then they'll make a statement, and they'll send it to the right people, and push for a law to be passed, and then it won't be passed. It'll be voted down. And I've talked to them, and they will encourage me when I get frustrated with that. They'll say, "Don't despair. They've been doing this a long time." So there is a faithfulness to keep speaking up, even if you're not winning. Even if
That's Jesus-like.
right. There's no guarantee that we're going to win these debates. But the temptation then is to be quiet, say, well, I can't do anything about it. And that's not the Jesus way. The Jesus way is to try again and keep speaking and keep working, and trust that God will do what God does, through your voice, through the voice of others. And at some point, the oppressed will be set free. I think of, was it 400 years of slavery in Egypt before Moses came along and they were set free, and how long before the civil rights movement crested and actually resulted in laws being changed and society being changed.
Right.
We're recording this on Juneteenth.
Yes, we are.
And so today we're celebrating the end of slavery in our country, and some of that work was Christians, looking at scripture and advocating on behalf of slaves and freedom, and taking risks, and starting a movement that that started overseas in England and came to the United States and ended in a civil war, but led to that freedom that is that Jesus wanted from the beginning.
Right. And you have different seasons of life and what you can do in those seasons of life. Like, I remember when the Black Lives Matter movement happened in the midst of the COVID pandemic as well, that I had a newborn baby. And I said, I want to be out there. I want to put my voice into this. Like, I want to do something, but I have a newborn and I'm on maternity leave. Like, I actually should not be working. I should not be taking my newborn out to a rally. I should, right? And so I think I vented on social media, and I said, I wish I could be there with you. And someone commented and said, you're doing justice work right now. You're taking care of your kids. And if you're raising your kids up to say, this is wrong and this is what we fight for, then you're doing justice work too. And so I had never framed it that way. I was like, no, I can't do what's public, what's out there. Right. And so I did end up doing a children's message, I think, for maternity leave. I was like, I have to say something. But it was during COVID, so you could do a little video and then place it into the online worship. So I had very small that I could say as a voice, but also like there's just seasons of life where sometimes it's writing letters or calling your policymakers and not coming to a rally. Maybe you are going to a rally. Maybe you're just child rearing the next generation and teaching them the values that we want
But
to
it's
uphold.
it's doing something, and you did something, right?
I did.
Like, you didn't stay silent. I remember that day because I preached about George Floyd in that recording for that sermon, and so I think it's that we're not silent, right? That
Right.
if we're following the way of Jesus and we see someone oppressed and we see a need in society or an injustice,
Right.
that we find a way to act,
Right.
that's appropriate to who we are, our gifts, our station in life,
Right.
all of those things, but we don't choose to not act.
Right.
We
It makes me think of the widow's mite, which is usually used as like, give everything. Look at this widow who gave her last. But really, that whole story is Jesus turning on the Pharisees and saying, you made her give her last coin.
Right.
Not okay.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, you're taking advantage. Again, you're kind of like putting this power on this person and taking even more from them.
And he is teaching people to look at the small person that's hidden,
Right.
that could be being hurt by this, rather than the people who are making all the noise and
Right.
and all of that. That's going back to what Jesus teaches us to do, is to look for the small, focus on the people, the invisible, the
Heal on the Sabbath. Do it.
Yeah. I think another part of it is paying attention to the voices of the other and giving them, I'm a white straight man with a lot of status and power, and so part of my call, I think, in following Jesus is when, someone who is not like me in lots of different ways starts speaking, that I listen and learn and see if I can use what my positions to elevate their voice.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's not me speaking, it's me making space for other people to speak.
Okay. Well, and sometimes that takes humility. I know in a lot of conversations about race that I had in seminary with fellow Black students, and like, that was not my experience. They would have a very different experience from this white professor, and I wanted to hear their testimony, but it meant that I had to be humble because I never experienced that professor that way, but I'd have to hear their testimony and believe it and lift it up, even if it means that like my side is not heard, their side is heard. And so it takes some humility. Sometimes you say the wrong thing and someone calls you out on it and you're like, yep, I said that wrong.
Right. Yeah, to be teachable, and that is hard. It's hard when that defensiveness kind of rises up within you, and you want to be like, we're not all that bad, because I'm a person in power, and so it's kind of my class of people that are being called out most often, and the temptation is to either not listen or get defensive or dismiss the accusations.
Right.
And I think the way of Jesus is to pay attention, to listen, and to learn, and to grow and change and be called to account. That sometimes it's going out and doing justice. Sometimes it's letting yourself be changed by those who are doing justice, because you're the one.
Right.
You're part of the problem.
Right.
And you need to adjust and be more like Christ.
Well, right, and that plays into the other imitation that we were talking about of crossing boundaries, like being willing to go across and learn something new from somebody else that doesn't have the same experience that you do. I take a group of high schoolers every single year to new places, and I always am trying to be very intentional to get them out of their personal bubble to go and serve someone else, but also not to do it in like, you need us. No, I try to like frame it as an immersion experience. Like, you need to just go meet these people, figure out how they live, how they've lived their life, and maybe your eyes will be opened. I don't actually want this to be like a service project where you think you're better than the other person. I want you to say, oh, how can I come alongside what you're already working on in your community? And also like get to know a person that lives in West Virginia rather than, or in California, or we're going to Puerto Rico, like, right, get to know other people and how other people live, because it's opening your eyes.
I remember going on those trips when I was a kid, and sometimes they were problematic in that we would collect a bunch of stuff that was not the best stuff, clothing or whatever, and give it away, and
feel so good about ourselves.
Pat ourselves on the back. Here we are to save the day. We're the heroes. That's a problem. But the best experiences were when we had conversations and someone was translating, and we could just talk to somebody who was a lot poorer than us, who didn't have nearly as much, choices or economic opportunity and let them tell us about their life. And it's the same thing over and over again, is learning to see everybody as a child of God, as a person. And then if there's injustice being done, use the tools you have, whether it's speaking to power or advocating for justice in some other way to help that person